Hello everyone and welcome back to the Little Quilter. Today we are starting quilting the Kite in a Square quilt. So I want to show you guys, we're going to start with doing the border today, and I also wanted to show you what I have done to ensure that my quilt is centered with the back of my quilt, okay? Alright, so last time I talked to you guys about how I marked my line so that I knew I was right in line with it. And then what I actually did is I went and I pinned. So this pin is making sure that I am at the same point on the back of the quilt and that I'm lined up at the same point on the back of the quilt. Okay, so the caveat with this is that while these pins are in there to help me to make sure that this quilt doesn't move, I would never ever put pins in my quilt if I was going to be doing a pantograph. Because if I'm doing a pantograph, I'm going to the back of the quilt and I can't see those pins at all anymore. And if you run over those pins with your long arm quilting machine, you could break a needle, you could mess up your timing, you could mess up your machine, and that would be terrible. So I do not recommend ever putting pins in your quilt and then going and doing a pantograph. Now, if you are going to have those pins in there and be very, very cognizant that you have them in there when you're quilting on the front of your machine, it's just going to be easier for you to see the pins and go, yes, I need to pull that pin out now. And I'm only going to leave them in there until I feel confident that the quilt is set and that I'm not worried about it shifting. Now, every time I move this quilt up, I will likely go ahead and put pins in again just to make sure that it stays where I want it to stay. And I'm really only pinning right around that center block. I'm not pinning across the whole quilt. And it may not even be necessary. It's just I have never done a quilt like this before, and I'm really worried, especially at this initial part, that it's going to move. As we progress through it, maybe we won't need the pins anymore, but I just wanted to make that clear that you definitely don't want to use pins if you're going to the back of your quilt. Just go ahead, set it on your machine, and go, and just do what you can. But if you're free motion quilting, you're going to be watching it just like you are when you sit down at your regular sewing machine. Then I think putting a pin in there is going to be fine. Some people would probably say that's overkill because that's the whole point of the long arm. And maybe once I put some regulating stitches in there and I feel comfortable that it's not going to wiggle, like I said, I may not need them again. But without further ado, let's go ahead and show you the quilting design that I have for this, and we're going to jump into actually quilting it. Okay, so just had one of the more harrowing experiences of quilting in that I had just started the border and was coming up on what I didn't expect to be a very bulky seam. And obviously I'll show it to you guys, but it apparently was, and my needle got stuck. It couldn't go through the fabric at all. And of course, it's just like trying to push through, and I'm thinking, dear God, it's going to break. Something bad is going to happen to the whole machine, and it's going to be broken, and then I'm going to be in, just absolute sadness that I can't quilt or any of those. But it finally stopped, and I had to use my hand crank to pull it up from where it had tried to go through. And then, of course, I became in complete panic that, I mean, this thing is full of bulky seams. Every place where those kites come together, I mean, it's a bulky seam. There's just no way for it not to be a bulky seam, because of the way that I had to iron those to one side. I couldn't iron them open. And then you have, you know, a double layer of fabric coming together in 4 points. So, I mean, those center seams are really thick. And so then I was thinking, I don't really know what to do. If it's not going to quilt through this. I've just loaded this quilt. I've spent all this time and I'm not going to be able to quilt it. So what I've decided to do, after I took a moment and did a ton of research to see if there was anything out there, and I really didn't see anything. So if you know something, please let me know. Like, should I get a larger needle? Is that even a thing that you can do on a long arm? I know they'll use like denim needles, but this is a long arm machine. I'm not sure if they make denim needles, or, I also read somewhere that a thinner needle would be better to pass through the fabric. I don't think that's the case in this instance. I think it was just a very thick seam. But my main thing here is my design does not really go over this. And so certainly I can avoid that and just quilt each kite on its own. Let me show you. Okay, so this was actually the seam where it buckled. Like, I could not go any farther. If I tried to go any farther, it just messed up. And so I just, for sake of having no idea where else to go, I went back up this seam, came back over here, and started down that way. So here is the block that I've quilted, and I was absolutely terrified coming to this point here. Now, what you will notice is that I did not go into this point at all. I'm a decent bit of ways, and that was done on purpose because I was too afraid that it would get stuck. So I can basically quilt the whole thing just avoiding this seam and going to the center of this seam. And I guess that's what I'm going to do because I don't want to experience that again. So yeah, I hope that doesn't happen again. A bit afraid that it might, but if you guys have any ideas on what I could do to decrease that risk, or if changing my needle size would help, or anything, that would be great. Let me know. But we're going to continue along on this. I'm trying to get just the border done so that I can at least see what that looks like. And I'm liking how it looks. I didn't tell you guys, so I am using a yellow thread called Lemon Ice from Glide, and the corresponding bottom thread is the same color as well. I think it looks nice so far. I do think it's going to be darker on the purple fabrics, and I did question that choice, but at the end of the day, at some point, you just have to choose a color, and I'm not going to change my thread color for all of these. That would be insane. So some of them are going to mesh really well, and some are going to show up a little bit more, and that's going to be okay. And we have to be okay with those things, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and jump back into quilting. Alright, so I wanted to give you an idea, if you weren't able to tell, how I was kind of quilting this. So you can see on the first one here, I actually started out at the top, came down, sewed these, came back up, around, and then when I ended here, I had to do this going downward. This left me at a point where other than backtracking to come up here, I didn't really have an option to go forward without backtracking other than going this way. I didn't really like that idea because I know I'm going to come back and I'm going to quilt this, and it left me with no ability to come back up here other than, again, backtracking here, coming across and doing those, and I didn't like that idea. So on the next one, because I started out at the bottom, it actually worked out well to do that same process because I ended up at the bottom and was able to come up at the top and then continue filling in my border with these piano key style. And that was really great until I ended up here. And then I was like, oh, wait a second. What am I going to do? So basically, I went to here, and what I decided to do was, once I quilted down far enough, quilt it here, I decided to just do basically an outline and then fill it in, come back, fill in these piano keys. What I have left is this right here. So this line is unquilted. But again, I still have to come back and do these blocks right here. So I'm not really bothered by the fact that this line isn't quilted. I will catch this whenever I go through here and do these. So I think that's going to be the most efficient way to finish quilting this. So that's what I'm going to do from here on out. You can also see that this is where I had my pin, and so I have now removed my pin. Let me show you what the underside of it looks like. Okay, so I haven't actually been under here to see what it looks like, so I am a little bit nervous. We're coming up so far, so good. So that's a nice outline of that top one. So we're not quite to the block yet. We are to this block, and this is what that's looking like, which I think is pretty cool. So I am using this as just an extension of the pattern. So this pattern is going to be the same used in all of these blocks here, and I've decided to just extend it into the border design, and I think that's turned out really, really nicely. All right, everybody, the border line on the top row is done, which is awesome. And it didn't take too long. Now, I was noticing from my drawing that I actually initially meant to make these piano keys more, actually, well, not more, but I meant to make them horizontal instead of vertical like they are. But I'm actually glad that I didn't do that. I think it looks, I just like the look of it, honestly. So I guess whenever I was doing it and just quilting, I just went with what I thought looked nice. And that's what I think looks nice. I'm really happy with how it turned out. So let me show you guys a little bit closer. All right, so getting a little closer on these, the key things that I would say on this is I actually found making these little loops, if you could make them more more circular. Here's one that I think looks a lot better. So coming through here and really making these loops really helped me to keep it a little bit more consistent. You know, all of them, there's a few little wobbly ones in there, but I found that if let me see if I can find one. I mean, this one isn't bad either, but you can see that these are a little bit more elongated loops, you know, and maybe that's something that you like. You know, maybe you like the look of this better, but I personally liked as I went, I felt like I got a little bit more circular, and like this one really, I got a lot more of that sort of C shape look to it, and I think that that looks a lot better. And whenever I was quilting it, I found it a lot easier to keep it consistent than when they got more elongated and flat. So just my tip on that one. So hopefully that's helpful. I like the piano keys. I feel like it gives it a good texture to the quilt without being over stimulating, because there's a lot going on in this quilt with the color pattern, the fabric itself, and then just the quilting itself. So I do think that just kind of gives a nice sort of rest for the area for the eye. So I'm happy went with that. And yeah, that's the border done. So I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and we will see you next time on the Little Quilter. Have a wonderful day. Thanks.